The rain poured over the city of glass and gold as billionaire Ethan Cole, CEO of one of the world's largest tech empires, leaned back in his private jet, exhausted but restless. His life was a blur of meetings, headlines, and numbers that stretched into infinity, yet none of it felt real anymore. He had everything a man could dream of: power, wealth, respect, but lately, the laughter in his mansion had faded, the warmth of family dinners replaced by silence. His wife, Lila, barely spoke to him except through quick video calls. His son, Noah, had grown distant, hiding behind games and headphones. It had been months since Ethan saw his family in person. Tonight, he canceled a trip without telling anyone, deciding to return home early, unannounced. He wanted to surprise them, maybe even fix what had been broken for so long. But what he found that night would change him forever. When his car rolled up the long driveway of the Cole estate, a mansion glowing like a crystal palace under the lightning sky, Ethan expected joy, maybe a warm welcome. Instead, he was greeted by silence. No servants at the door, no sound of the piano Lila once played in the evenings. The grand chandelier glittered coldly above the marble floor as he stepped inside. His shoes echoed against emptiness. Something felt wrong. He checked his watch, 8:46 p.m. Usually by now, the house was alive. But tonight, nothing. Then, faintly, he heard laughter, not from the living room, but from downstairs, in the servants' quarters. He frowned. Why were his staff awake so late? He followed the sound, descending the back staircase, and stopped at the edge of the hallway. There, through the slightly open door of the small kitchen, he saw something that froze him. His housemaid, Maria, was sitting at the table with his young son Noah, laughing as they shared bowls of noodles. The boy's face, once pale from loneliness, was glowing. He was smiling, really smiling, something Ethan hadn't seen in years. They were joking, playing, talking about superheroes and dreams. Maria, the same woman Ethan barely noticed, was teaching Noah how to fold dumplings by hand. Her hands were rough, her clothes simple, yet the love in her eyes was pure. Ethan stood there unseen, watching as his son found joy not in luxury, not in gadgets, but in the company of someone who cared. He realized, painfully, that his billions had bought everything, except this. He quietly backed away, his heart pounding. He had always thought being a good father meant providing more, bigger houses, faster cars, endless comfort. But what Noah needed was time, warmth, presence. And Maria, a woman who earned less in a month than Ethan spent on a single meal, had given his son what all his money couldn't: love. Ethan walked into his study, sat down, and stared at the family portrait on the wall, himself in a designer suit, Lila smiling faintly beside him, Noah forced between them. It all looked fake now. For the first time in years, he felt like a stranger in his own home. He picked up his phone and hovered over Lila's number but stopped. What would he even say? That he finally saw how empty their world had become? That his empire, built on innovation, had failed to innovate his own heart? Outside, thunder rolled. He stood and went back downstairs. This time, Maria noticed him standing by the door. Her eyes widened, and she immediately stood up, apologizing. "Sir, I'm sorry, but Ethan stopped her gently. "No. Don't be. Please, sit." His voice cracked slightly. Noah turned, eyes wide. "Dad?" Ethan nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, buddy. I came home early." The room felt awkward, fragile. Maria hesitated, unsure if she should leave, but Ethan motioned for her to stay. "I didn't mean to interrupt," he said. "Actually, can I join you?" Noah blinked. "You want noodles?" Ethan nodded again. "Yeah. I think I've forgotten what home-cooked food tastes like." Maria's face softened, and she quickly fetched a bowl. The billionaire, the man who dined with world leaders, sat at a chipped wooden table, eating cheap noodles made by a maid. And yet, it was the best meal of his life. As they ate, Ethan listened, really listened, to his son talk about his dreams, about how Maria helped him with school, how she told stories about her little brother back in Mexico. Every word was a stab of realization. He'd been absent, blind to the quiet souls who carried the weight of his home. When Noah went to bed that night, Ethan asked Maria to stay a moment. "How long have you been working here?" he asked softly. "5 years, sir," she replied. "Since Noah was a baby." He nodded slowly. "You've done more for him than I ever did." She shook her head. "No, sir. You gave him a life I could never give." But Ethan looked at her and said, "You gave him something money can't buy." She lowered her eyes, touched. "He just needs someone to listen," she whispered. "Children, they don't care how rich their fathers are. They just want to feel loved." Ethan's throat tightened. He thanked her and went to his room, but he didn't sleep. The mansion felt heavier than ever. He walked through the dark halls, remembering the early days when he and Lila had nothing, when they used to cook together, dream together. Somewhere along the way, success had replaced sincerity, and wealth had stolen their warmth. He stood at the window, watching lightning flash over the city skyline, a skyline he'd helped build, and for the first time, he felt small. Truly small. That night, he made a quiet promise to himself: he would fix what he broke. Not with money, but with time. The next morning, when Noah came down for breakfast, he was shocked to find his father in an apron, trying to fry eggs, badly. "Dad! You're cooking." Ethan laughed nervously. "Trying to." Maria chuckled from the corner. Lila came downstairs, still sleepy, surprised to see her husband home. She froze. "Ethan? You didn't tell me." "I wanted to surprise you," he said softly. "And maybe, start over." She looked at him, confused, then slowly smiled, the first real smile he'd seen in years. For the first time, the Cole family sat at the same table, not as billionaire royalty, but as a family rediscovering itself. That morning, Ethan realized the truth: sometimes, the most powerful thing a man can do is come home early. The sun rose softly over the Cole estate, casting golden light through the tall glass windows, warming a home that had been cold for too long. Ethan Cole, billionaire, visionary, and self-made man, stood in his own kitchen with his sleeves rolled up, trying to flip a pancake while his son laughed uncontrollably beside him. The smell of burnt batter filled the air, and even Maria couldn't hide her grin as she gently took the pan from his hand. "Sir, maybe I should," she began, but Ethan raised his hands in surrender. "You're right," he said with a sheepish smile. "I'm better at running companies than flipping pancakes." Lila entered quietly, watching from the doorway. For years, she'd seen her husband buried under deadlines and board meetings, chasing numbers while their son grew up without him. But now, seeing him in an apron, hair messy, covered in flour, she felt something stir, something she thought had died long ago. He turned and caught her gaze. "Hey," he said softly. "Coffee?" It wasn't much, but it was the beginning of something new. Over the next few weeks, the billionaire everyone knew began to disappear. Ethan stopped spending nights in his glass tower office. He cancelled corporate dinners and postponed luxury events. His assistant was shocked when he said, "Family first, everything else can wait." Instead of boardrooms, Ethan could be found helping Noah with homework, fixing the squeaky swings in the garden, or watching movies on the couch with popcorn in his lap. The city's tabloids whispered that the mighty Cole was losing his edge, that maybe his empire would crumble. But Ethan didn't care. For the first time, he was learning how to live. And every night, before bed, he thanked Maria quietly for being the spark that reminded him what mattered. He even raised her salary, but she told him humbly, "Sir, I don't work for money. I work for family." Those words hit him deeper than any deal ever had. One afternoon, Ethan drove to a small neighborhood, far from the skyscrapers and luxury condos, to visit Maria's family. She'd invited him to meet her brother, who was paralyzed from an accident years ago. Her house was small, walls cracked, but filled with laughter. Maria's brother smiled shyly from a wheelchair, and Ethan knelt beside him, humbled. "You know," Maria said softly, "we don't have much, but we have each other. That's enough." Ethan glanced around, the homemade photos, the laughter, the simple food on the table, and something inside him broke. For years, he'd mistaken wealth for happiness, but now he understood, it was the smallest houses that sometimes held the biggest hearts. That night, as he drove home under the stars, he whispered to himself, "I've been rich in everything but love." He came home to find Noah asleep on the couch with a half-finished drawing in his lap, a picture of their family. Ethan picked it up and felt tears burn his eyes. In the drawing, he was smiling, not in a suit, not with trophies or cars, just smiling with his wife and son, hand in hand. In that moment, Ethan realized what his empire had cost him. The next morning, he called a meeting with his top executives. "I'm stepping down," he announced. The room went silent. "I built this company to change the world," he continued, "but I forgot to change myself. I forgot to be a husband, a father, a man who knows what truly matters." The board tried to stop him, but Ethan was resolute. He appointed new leadership and walked out of that gleaming tower with nothing but peace in his heart. Reporters swarmed him for answers, but he simply said, "I'm going home." Weeks passed. The mansion slowly transformed, the endless glass halls filled with laughter, home-cooked meals, music. Lila reopened her art studio, painting for the first time in years. Noah's grades improved, his smile brighter than ever. Ethan spent mornings gardening with Maria, learning how to grow tomatoes instead of profits. Every evening, they'd sit on the porch as the sun went down, the air filled with warmth and quiet gratitude. But the biggest surprise came one afternoon when Noah handed Ethan a small box wrapped in newspaper. "It's for you, Dad." Inside was a bracelet made of string and wooden beads. "It's not gold," Noah said shyly, "but it's from me." Ethan's voice cracked. "It's perfect." He hugged his son tightly, realizing that for all his billions, this was the first real gift he'd ever truly received. Months later, Maria came to him with tears in her eyes. Her brother's condition had worsened, and she needed to return home for good. Ethan was heartbroken but understood. He arranged for her brother's medical care, secretly funding a rehabilitation center in her town, under her name. When she found out, she cried, "Sir, why would you do this?" Ethan smiled gently. "Because you taught me how to be human again." She hugged him, whispering, "Don't stop being this man." As her car drove away that day, Ethan stood by the gate, watching with gratitude. Maria had been more than a maid, she had been the angel who woke his sleeping soul. Years later, people still spoke of Ethan Cole, the billionaire who walked away from billions. But those who knew him said he'd found something far greater, peace. His story spread quietly across the internet, not as a tale of power, but of purpose. In an interview, when a reporter asked what changed him, he smiled and said, "I came home early, and saw what love looks like." The clip went viral. Millions watched it, many with tears in their eyes, realizing that maybe they too were missing the same.